Today's reading is from Isaiah 9, 1 through 6. Please feel free to read along by turning to page 638 in the Old Testament portion of your pew Bibles. But there will be no gloom for those who are in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt in the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulder, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the trampling warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a son has been born to us. For a child has been born to us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. May the Spirit of wisdom guide our understanding of this scripture. Thanks be to God.
So much around us calls us to not only feel doom and gloom, but to also be on the lookout for it. Because right around the corner, it may be there, in the form of another shocking news story, or an unexpected diagnosis of a friend, family member, or a complete surprise from our situation at work. These sorts of things were on my mind when I came across an article a couple of months ago about Tom Hanks playing TV's Mr. Rogers in the movie A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, not long before the movie came out. The title of the article and the subtitle caught my eye. It reads, "This Tom Hanks story will help you feel less bad." Hanks is playing Mr. Rogers in a new movie and is just as nice as you think he is. Please read this article anyway. It's unfortunate that the author of the article felt the need to put that last line in there. But it makes sense. The premise of the article is that Hanks is such a nice guy that the author could not come up with anything scandalous or salacious to say about it. So, instead, she describes how nice of a guy Hanks is and what a difference he has made in her life. In a similar fashion to how Mr. Rogers makes quite a difference in the lives of one of the main characters in the movie, a magazine writer who shows up to write an article about Mr. Rogers. One sentence from the article particularly stuck with me. It says, "So Tom Hanks is as nice as you think he is, and exactly what you hope him to be. Which is great, unless you're someone trying to tell a good story about him, with elements like an arc and narrative tension." She's right. Again, it is unfortunate, but she is onto something. She felt the need to write that phrase, "Please read this article anyway," in the subtitle of the article, because our society has been asked to read stories about men and women being and doing good, but doesn't tend to do so. We tend to skip over those stories. Those sorts of stories can seem boring when we're forced to be on the lookout for doom and gloom in our personal lives, in our nation, and in the world around us. The Israelites were also on the lookout for and living in a world full of doom and gloom in our passage for today. But the prophet Isaiah called them to a different vision, one of a great light, and to live as such. The passage that we just read a few minutes ago was essentially a song in its original form. Verse 2, the proclamation that those who walk in darkness will see a great light, serves as a chorus, followed by three things that must happen in order for that chorus to be true. The presence of a powerful oppressor who has overpowered the people, a reminder of violence and forces that still stand in the way of that great light, and the idea that someone in the line of King David may seize the chance to make that great light a reality again. This last item particularly provided the people hope in their time that the kingdoms that had been split might be restored. It's important to keep in mind the original meaning here in Isaiah's words here, that interpreting chaos and preparing the Israelites to live with hope, moving forward. It was the original intent. Now, at the same time, we today cannot help but also be reminded of Jesus doing the same thing in the line of David hundreds of years later, and still doing the same thing today. Helping those who walk in darkness see a great light and come to understand what that reality can mean for their lives. Isaiah is so convinced of this reality coming to pass that in the first verse of our passage, before these verses that we're talking about, Isaiah proclaims that there will come a time when there will be no more gloom for those who are captive, for those who have been overpowered, for those who are vulnerable, for those who are without privilege. There will come a time when they can make things happen again on their own, which is significant because of not only what has happened to them, but also because of who they are. Simply put, the privileges they had previously experienced had been taken away from them. Privilege. That's something that, fortunately, is being talked about more and more today. Though to me, there's no amount of talk or action about privilege that can right the wrongs that exist today. The Israelites did not have much privilege at this particular time in their history. I, on the other hand, I am what you would find if you looked up the word privilege in Webster's dictionary. I'm white. I am male. I'm heterosexual. I am Christian. I'm a citizen of the United States. These are privileges I have simply because of who I am. But what about the non-white individuals? What about non-male individuals? What about non-heterosexual individuals? Non-Christian individuals? What about non-citizen individuals among us? I could stand up here all day and list out those without privilege, or those with less privilege than others in our society. What do we do about those without or with less privilege in our society, which in some or even many occasions may mean us? Isaiah's call was to keep your head up in spite of doom and gloom and darkness and fearfulness. But that can be so difficult when someone's lack of privilege keeps them from being able to do that. So, Isaiah's call today calls us to not only keep our heads up because of great lights out there on the horizon, wherever we can find them, but if you have any privileges, or a lot of privileges, in my case, Isaiah's words call us to help out and to stand in place for those lacking privilege. To do that, we have to first understand what it's like to not have a privilege, whatever that privilege may be. I'm reminded of a scene from that movie about Mr. Rogers, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, as I would imagine some or maybe even many of you have seen. I'm reminded of a scene in which the magazine writer, who's assigned to write the article, comes to meet with Mr. Rogers for the first time for his writing assignment. The writer finds Mr. Rogers on the floor spending time with a young boy who had motor skill and developmental challenges. Mr. Rogers had agreed to spend time with the young boy who had visited the set that Mr. Rogers invited him to. The young boy's parents were trying to get the boy to scurry off because they didn't want to take up too much of Mr. Rogers' time. And the parents seemed to be a bit embarrassed because the boy was not responding to Mr. Rogers directly with his communication and Mr. Rogers' attempts to play with the child. And the staff of the show were becoming increasingly stressed because Mr. Rogers was spending so much time with the young boy that he was putting them behind significantly in their schedule for shooting shows for that day. But the more time Mr. Rogers spent with that child, being down there on his level, eye to eye, the more the boy began to respond to Mr. Rogers, to the point that he eventually talked with and was able to say goodbye to Mr. Rogers. All because Fred Rogers was willing to not only look beyond his privilege of being able to walk and move without the help of aids, but also because he was willing to get down on the floor on the same level to better understand the young boy and his situation. Martin Luther King Jr., whom we took a day aside to call particular attention to this past week, he did the same thing. And he called for the exact same vision that Isaiah called for. He visited and he got to know people who had less money and less privilege than he himself did, to the point that he inspired that most important campaign known as the Poor People's Campaign. Because of his willingness to own up to his own privilege and to explore the lives of those without such privileges, he was able to say, and I quote, "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." That's what Isaiah was saying. Keep your chin up. Things may not be good right now, but they will get better. That reminds me of a woman who saw her share of tough and painful times. I got to know her when she was in her 60s, after she had already endured a number of rounds of cancer. The first round of cancer being particularly difficult, not only because of the severe nature of the cancer that she was dealing with and the treatments that she was undergoing, but also because she was served divorce papers while on a hospital bed receiving cancer treatments. Cancer would eventually catch back up with her again, but during the years that I served on church staff, where she was a church member, I got to know her as the best youth sponsor I ever had in all my years of church and student ministry. My favorite memory of her is hosting our high school youth group to her house for dinner. She walked among and talked with the youth just like she was one of them. Her being a high school teacher for decades helped, but I thought she had better match when she went up to the youth who tended to gravitate towards corners, the youth who attended every youth event, but did so begrudgingly because she was forced to go by her parents. So I shuddered as I saw her across the way walk towards that youth, sure of a conversation I thought, that would not end well for Miss Gingrich, because the youth was known for her harsh words towards others. But she persistently stuck that conversation out, and she wound up getting that youth to smile, to engage with her, and to say more words to her in that one conversation than that youth said to me in all my years combined during my time with her at that church. And she did it by connecting on mutual interests of theirs. This youth had no privilege whatsoever in her surroundings, in her environment, among her peers. She was not popular. She was shy. Her interests were much different than the other youth members. None of those things were wrong. In fact, they are what made that youth the wonderful individual she was becoming. But they set her apart from the loud, boisterous high school group that she was forced to be a part of, that I was youth minister of. But Jackie was willing to look beyond her privilege and her standing among the youth and among the community members as a whole, for that matter, borrowing from Mr. Rogers' playbook to get on the level of this youth to better understand her, and thereby show her that while things may not be great at this time, keep your chin up. Look out on the horizon. There's great lights down there. Many people know about Jackie Gingrich simply because of who she was. The first ex-wife of Newt Gingrich, and possibly by the way she was treated by her ex-husband. But if a story was written about who she actually was, what she actually did, and her contagious kindness, though, it would likely have to have something along the lines of this in the subtitle to catch people's attention. She was just as nice as you think she is. Please read this article anyway. Verse 2 of our passage for today was even more striking in the original Hebrew language because of the words used for great light and darkness in that language. The great light being described is such a stark difference from the darkness that was being described that people naturally gravitate towards that great light. It's the same for people today walking in darkness, especially those without privileges. May we be like Tom Hanks and Jackie Gingrich, people who naturally help those without privilege, that it is so common, so mundane, so boring, that others would be tempted to skip over an article written about who we are and what we do.